Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to do an interview on the future of work. And throughout the course of this discussion, I realized very quickly that this talk wasn't about work. It was about the future of humanity. Now, I'll save you the details, but what I ultimately walked away with was the fact that humans are funny creatures. We say we want one thing, but yet we do the opposite. As an example, we look for community, yet we find ourselves secluding away from others. We seek love, but we're afraid to take the risk required to get it. And ultimately, we're hungry for change, but we're not willing to change inside. Leading change is an inside job. And for me, I've gone on a journey recently, as many of you have, thanks to our friend COVID. About 2 months after that interview, I found myself in Melbourne, Australia, where I had been for a couple of weeks. The country at large was beginning to change. Policy was being put in place to start to contain the virus, and bars and restaurants, gyms and other facilities were beginning to close. And as this was happening around me, I started to wonder what was going back on in the US. And when I turned on the TV to learn that virus numbers had begun to skyrocket in major cities around the country, I focused on my home of New York. And I saw that this is the place that had become a hotbed for the virus in the US. Shortly thereafter, I received a message from the State Department that said, expats and those traveling abroad, get home now or run the risk of being left out indefinitely. Well, I didn't take that very lightly, and I booked the next flight out of there. But I had a bit of a problem. As I mentioned, New York City was on fire, and I didn't dare take the risk of going to an island of 2 million people as this thing continued to spread. And then the other issue that I had was my dog Carter. I left him with my mom in our rural hometown in Western Pennsylvania, and I needed to go retrieve him. So I came to the quick conclusion. Head back to the US, get to Pittsburgh, make the trek up to my hometown, and shelter in place there with my mom and my dog. Not the most comfortable decision I've ever had to make. So as I begun making the journey back to the US, I noticed a number of thoughts show up that drove feelings that I didn't really want to have. See, I'm not a big fan of my hometown. In fact, I go back as little as possible. When I was growing up there, I felt like it was stifling. I felt like it was too small for me and I needed to break out. I felt like I couldn't possibly be me in this rural setting in the middle of nowhere. And as an adult, how could I possibly thrive there, especially for some unknown period of time, sheltering in place? And as the plane landed in Pittsburgh, I could feel the anxiety growing, a feeling I was familiar with, one that I had had many times before as I had returned to this place. And it was at that point that I made a choice. I needed to start suspending those beliefs. What I needed to do was begin to block out those negative thoughts about my hometown and instead go back with fresh eyes. And as my mom picked me up from the airport and drove me that hour and a half north to my hometown, I was quickly reminded of why I had those opinions. Driving through the Rust Belt of Western Pennsylvania doesn't provide the most scenic things to see. In fact, it's downright depressing in some parts. Going the country roads, winding around the empty fields, seeing some of the despair that has hit that part of the country makes you absolutely fearful in some ways. And I was not immune to this. Those feelings of that former belief of how negative this place was continued to grow in me. And that night when I went to bed, I realized I don't know how long I'll be here. And I certainly don't want to feel this way. So I had to make another choice. I realized that suspending that belief about my hometown wasn't working. So I needed to create a new belief. And I began to literally talk myself into the fact that this place was my home, that this place could provide me everything that I've ever needed, that it was welcoming, that in times of disaster, it was the place that I went to, that ultimately the people could be like me. And in fact, it's where I could grow and prosper during this unknown time. And when I woke the next morning, what happened surprised me. I didn't wake with fear and trepidation, hesitation, or concern. I woke with a little bit of hope. I woke with actually a little excitement. Perhaps I could go out and see this town again with new eyes that I hadn't explored for 20 years, find adventure in places I hadn't been before, uncover stones that had never previously been uncovered. And I left that morning doing just that, with a little bit of pep in my step. I took Carter for a walk around the town, and I started to realize I could see things I had never seen before. I started to see the beautifully manicured lawns and the landscaping of my neighbors, where they kept their homes pristine and they had pride in the community. I started to see literal signs of bake sales and country fairs that due to COVID weren't going to happen this year, but were reminders that this was a community of people that loved to come together for experiences and events where they could be with one another. Now, granted, not all the signs I saw were that positive and fed into this new belief for me. In fact, some signs, both figuratively and literally, fed into that negative opinion I had, and I had to fight it off. I had to keep persisting forward with this new belief and not let the old one rear its ugly head. So I did. And as I did, I started to have a greater feeling of hope about how long I could be there. And in fact, I started to relax into the experience. But I knew that wasn't going to be enough. And I realized I can't just be a passive observer of my community. What I needed to be was an active participant in having the community that I wanted, the community that made me feel the way I was feeling in that moment. And so with that, I made a choice to act, to take one small step. And a couple of days before Easter, I walked into my mom's house with 10 dozen cookies, bunny rabbits with smiles on their faces. And my mom said, "What are you doing? I knew you were crazy, but what is this all about?" And I enrolled her in the possibility, a possibility that we could be the change we were looking for, that we could be the change the neighborhood needed. See, we were all sheltered in place. We were tired of it, and we wanted something more. We were hoping for somebody to come along and save us, something to change that made us feel better, happier. Why couldn't that be us? So we packaged 12 dozen cookies with care, and we included a little note. Well, show you here.
Okay, about to head out around the neighborhood to spread the message. Hey neighbor, during these trying times, we figured everyone could use an extra smile. A little love from your neighbors is where we're reminded now more than ever to love thy neighbor. Together this too shall pass. Love your neighbor, and a little extra smile on Easter. Let's hope everybody can enjoy them.
Something so small, something seemingly so innocent, made such a profound difference. As we walked around the neighborhood that day, most people were hesitant to answer their door. Some weren't even home. But those that did, bearing masks as we were in gloves, handing out Ziploc bags, were grateful. Some were downright appreciative. And some hadn't seen a soul since shelter in place began, and they let us know how grateful they were. And I realized at that point in time that we could make a difference. And you know what? It made a difference to me too, because it reinforced this new belief that this community could be there for me. But what happened next was the part I never expected. A couple days later, I was in the front yard and I was compelled to do a little landscaping to keep up with the neighbors. And one of the neighbors drove by, rolled down their window as they stopped their vehicle, and they said, "Hey, you're the one that left those cookies, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am." "Hi, my name's Bill. I've lived in the neighborhood for 25 years, and we've never had something like that around here. I just wanted to introduce myself and welcome you. Is that your mom in there? Can we do anything for her? Suddenly, people started to come out and create the community I was looking for. Not an hour later, another guy drove by, and this time bearing gifts. He brought a platter of baklava and said, hey, cookies deserve a treat of their own. And here he gave us a gift to say thank you for what we had done. Another woman stopped by with an elderly woman she was watching after in the community and said, do you understand that she has not stopped talking about this since she received those cookies? You made her day. She has no family in the neighborhood. She has no community around here. She's been living in that home for 60 years. And you made a difference. That one action made me realize that we have the ability to create what we're looking for. But as I thought about it more, as I thought about what was unfolding in front of me, what I realized is that it wasn't the action. It was actually the fact that it took me changing my belief to ultimately change the result I was looking for. The community I thought I could never have was right there in front of me if I would just get out of my own way. Changing your belief can ultimately change your results in life. Let me share another story with you about quarantine in that community. Just down the street from my mom, there was a house that was adorned with Harley Davidson everything. Harley Davidson motorcycle in the driveway, a flag hanging from the house. The mailbox was orange and black like Harley Davidson, and there was a stone embossed with the Harley Davidson logo with the last name of the residents written through it. And for me, that was a red flag. Stay away from that house. Because despite the fact that I knew Harley riders my entire life, and a lot of them were amazing people, I had subconsciously had this belief I wasn't even aware of, that Harley riders, those that you don't know, are probably trouble. And good chance you're going to get in trouble too, so stay clear. Well, once I took inventory of that belief, I went into action in the same way. I chose to suspend it. I chose to put a new belief in place that Harley riders were fun and adventurous. They were looking for open roads and the journey. They were like me in that we loved America, but we loved our freedom, and we just wanted to explore. And with that newfound belief and those new feelings, I started to get really curious. Who was this guy down there? And not a day later, I found myself walking again, and this time beelining for his house. Instead of avoiding like I typically would, my belief had me say, actually go that way. See if he's there. And sure enough, at the bottom of the driveway, washing his motorcycle, there he was. And I started to walk down the driveway, and as I approached, I could see his bandana with his sleeveless shirt and tattoos, which again would have triggered that previous belief, stay clear. Instead, I stepped into it and reminded myself of that new belief that I wanted to persist and take hold. And before long, reaching him, I said, hey, I don't mean to scare you. My name's Vincent. I live just up the road temporarily, and I wanted to introduce myself. I said, hey, I'm Butch. You're the guy that dropped off the cookies, aren't you? Yeah, that's me. My mom and I decided we would do that. Well, I wanted to say thank you. My wife baked up some cookies. I've been meaning to drop them off to you. Whoa, not what I expected. So I engaged in small talk to say, hey, your motorcycle's beautiful, man. I really like it. He's like, do you ride? Of course I ride. I ride BMWs and Triumphs, though. Again, expecting to be ridiculed for my choice not being a Harley. Whoa, I rode those my early days. I love those bikes. Those are great rides. You should come join us sometime for an adventure. Well, as the story would go, Butch and I started to form a relationship, a friendship. And Butch would choose when he came home in the evening to go the long way through our community so he could go past my house. And if I was outside or my mom was outside, Butch would stop, roll down his window, and say, hey, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything I can do for your mom? How is she? And by the way, when you go back to New York, make sure you give her my number, and if she needs anything, have her call me. In that moment, I was so embarrassed. I had taken inventory of my beliefs and came to recognize that those beliefs weren't serving me, so I changed them. And when I ultimately did, the result I got was an ally for me, for my community, an ally for my mother, who I care so much about, and I'm so grateful that he's there when I'm not. But had I kept that judgment and that stereotype up, if I hadn't been willing to do the work and challenge the belief, that wouldn't have emerged. So it's simple. And I've realized I can do it over and over again. If I take inventory of my beliefs in the moment, and if I suspend those that don't serve me, and in their place choose to create a new belief, even if it's a lie, a belief that I can lean into, and allow my feelings to guide the way, if I feel good about it, I keep going, and follow it up with some form of action, I can make a difference. I can change my outcome. The outside world begins to mirror the inside world. As a nation, we're clearly in difficult times. We're divided on so many matters. And we're seeking change. We're so desperate for it. But like I said at the beginning, so many of us want it, but we're so afraid to change ourselves. My ask of all of you is to check yourself. Take notice of your belief. Take that inventory and suspend those beliefs that aren't serving you, that aren't serving our divided nation, that aren't serving humanity, and choose something different. Maybe you'll end up with an ally the way that I did. Maybe you'll end up coming together as a nation. My hope is that we can all find a way to get through our trying times. I personally believe that everyone is deserving of love, of inclusion, of support. And the feeling that that brings me is joy and hopefulness. And the action I'm willing to take is right there. For anybody watching who needs an ear, who wants a friend, who simply wants to engage with another human being to better humanity, email me or find me on social media. I'm here for you. Thank you very much.